Supreme Court and New York City. Dueling trials. And you know what? I'm going to make a prediction. I'm going to go out on a limb. I have a feeling that one in New York ultimately may not matter so much because the biggie, the big one in Washington, D.C. is actually going to prove victorious for the president, former president of the United States. Let's listen to him here in New York complaining because he can't be at both places at once, right? And the judge in New York is like, nobody, you're going to sit here. You're going to sit here all day long. Hear the president.
So in the meantime, I'm at this trial. My constitutional rights have been taken away from me. But every single expert, every legal scholar, every respected scholar has said this is no case. There is no case here. This is just a political witch hunt. Thank you very much.
A political witch hunt. I mean, listen, at some point, you know, if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, it's probably a duck. They've tried over and over and over again to get him on something. And they keep failing. And again, my prediction on this one is that you're going to have a divided Supreme Court. But ultimately, they're going to make the decision that a president needs to be able to have a certain amount of autonomy and thus immunity in order to do his or her job, all right? That's just the reality of the gig. But this had to get explained out multiple times here to some of the justices. And it's very interesting how they are sort of down these party lines. I mean, that's in fact what we heard. I want you to hear first. I want you to hear first from Justice Sotomayor. Because she feels very strongly, right? You cannot have immunity because somehow now, like, all hell is going to break loose if they think that they have the ability to just do anything. I mean, she's kind of taking it one step too far, but I'll let her walk down this path. Let's listen to Justice Sotomayor.
It can be alleged, but it has to be proven. Malum in se is a concept long viewed as appropriate in law, that there's some things that are so fundamentally evil that they have to be protected against. Now, I think, and your answer below, I'm going to give you a chance to say if you stay by it. If the president decides that his rival is a corrupt person and he orders the military or orders someone to assassinate him, is that within his official acts that for which he can get immunity?
It would depend on the hypothetical.
And it seems like a stupid question, does it not?
It could, and why? Because he's doing it for personal reasons. He's not doing it like President Obama is alleged to have done it, to protect the country from a terrorist. He's doing it for personal gain. And isn't that the nature of the allegations here? That he's not doing these acts in furtherance of an official responsibility. He's doing it for personal gain.
I agree with that characterization of the indictment, and that confirms immunity, because the characterization is that there's a series of official acts that were done for an unlawful.
No, because immunity says even if you did it for personal gain, we won't hold you responsible. How could that be?
That's an extremely strong doctrine in this court's case law in cases like Fitzgerald.
Well, we go back to Justice Thomas's question, which...
Okay, so in other words, she's getting out over on her skis on this one in a big way. They want to say that somehow J6 was some kind of attempt to totally steal the whole government, and therefore, even though, you know, and we can rehash this, I've done a lot of reporting on this with you guys, and you know how I feel, especially the fact that somehow the only footage we ever got to see was Nancy Pelosi's daughter's footage, for goodness sakes. Alexandra Pelosi, yeah, she was invited inside with a camera, and then they spun that over and over and over again. CNN bought it, or maybe was given it by Alexandra, and it was treated as a CNN exclusive, and they just kept playing this in a loop over and over and over again. They didn't tell you that it was Alexandra Pelosi's daughter's footage after a while, but you're expected to believe, and only believe, that Donald Trump was out to steal the election and take the system, and then the march on Capitol Hill, et cetera, was all his fault, even though, of course, Nancy could have called in the National Guard, and she chose not to. So I have some pretty strong opinions on that, but they're trying to use that like they're trying to use everything to go after him. And so he's saying, well, wait a second, shouldn't I be immune from some certain things? I mean, hey, Gorsuch, Supreme Court Justice Gorsuch brought this up in the hearings just the other day, because, I mean, if you want to suddenly say that if you are disrupting a federal procedure, which they're alleging then that Donald Trump did by not somehow disseminating or maybe tweeting or doing whatever he could have done to stop the protest. If you somehow are interrupting the federal procedure, then you are guilty of a mega crime. To which, hey, I'm just wondering why the heck Rashida Tlaib's little group that decided to go march on Capitol Hill isn't in a little more trouble. Or, and Gorsuch brought this up, why Bowman, Representative Bowman, is not in more trouble, considering that he actually deliberately, and there's video of him doing this, I've showed it to you, pulled the fire alarm ahead of a budget vote. Is that not interrupting a federal proceeding? Let's listen to Gorsuch making this point just a couple of days ago.
Ought to be. Instead, we think the relevant similarity is obstruction of an official proceeding, because that's the language Congress chose.
General, if that's the case, what work does authorized do on your theory? Because I think I might, as I'm hearing you, think that whoever corruptly obstructs, influences, or impedes any official proceeding or attempts to do so stands alone. And the otherwise, I'm not hearing what work it does. Can you explain to me what work it does on your view?
Yes. So the work that otherwise does is to set up the relationship between C1 and C2 and make clear that C2 does not cover the conduct that's encompassed by C1. Now, I acknowledge that there would have been... Beyond saying, okay, C1 does some things, and the whole rest of the universe of obstructing, impeding, or influencing is conducted by C2. Is that a fair summary of your view? Yes, but there was a good reason for Congress to do it this way.
I
traces to the statutory history.
I understand
and
that.
I would just say that...
if I might. So what does that mean for the breadth of this statute? Would a sit-in that disrupts a trial or access to a federal courthouse qualify? Would a heckler in today's audience qualify, or at the State of the Union address? Would pulling a fire alarm before a vote qualify for 20 years in federal prison?
There are multiple elements of the statute that I think might not be satisfied by those hypotheticals, and it relates to the point I was going to make to the Chief Justice about the breadth of this statute. The kind of built-in limitations are the things that I think would potentially suggest that many of those things wouldn't be something the government could charge or prove as 1512c2 beyond a reasonable doubt, would include the fact that the actus reus does require obstruction, which we understand to be a meaningful interference. So that means that if you have some minor disruption or delay or some minimal outburst, we don't think it falls within the actus reus to begin with.
My outbursts require the court to reconvene after the proceeding has been brought back into line, or the pulling of the fire alarm, the vote has to be rescheduled, or the protest outside of a courthouse makes it inaccessible for a period of time. Are those all federal felonies subject to 20 years in prison?
So with some of them, it would be necessary to show nexus. So with respect to the protest outside the courthouse, we'd have to show that, yes, they were aiming at the proceeding.
Yeah, they were trying to stop the proceeding.
Yes, and then we'd also have to be able to prove that they acted corruptly, and this sets a stringent mens rea. It's not even just the mere intent to obstruct. We have to show that also, but we have to show that they had corrupt intent in acting in that way.
We went around that tree yesterday.
I know. I heard the argument yesterday, but I guess what I would say is that to the extent that your hypotheticals are pressing on the idea of a peaceful protest, even one that's quite disruptive, it's not clear to me that the government would be able to show that each of those protesters had corrupt intent.
So mostly peaceful protest that actually obstructs and impedes an official proceeding for an indefinite period would not be covered?
Not necessarily. We would just have to have the evidence of intent, and that's a high bar.
They intend to do it, all right.
Yes, if they intend to obstruct and were able to show that they knew that was wrongful conduct with consciousness of wrongdoing, then yes, that's a 1512c2 offense. And
what does corruptly add, in your view?
So corruptly adds the requirement that the defendant's conduct be wrongful and committed with consciousness of wrongdoing. And this trace.
I just gotta say, when you listen to that, I'm telling you, it sounds like Representative Bowman ought to be going to jail for 20 years, right? I mean, if you're going to subscribe to that kind of belief, and this is where you get into trouble, folks, right? Because they want the law to be manipulated to work for them, but never against them, only to work for them against conservatives, specifically one in particular being Donald Trump. And so you can't have a system that way, right? Because then you don't have a fair legal system in any way, shape, or form. So I think what you're going to find here is that there are some politics at play. It shouldn't be, but there are. And thus, you're going to have your liberal justices saying, oh, you know what? He's not going to get immunity. Now, you got to think about the immunity issue, really. What is that? Because if you actually don't have immunity and people want to get extraordinarily political, let's be very clear, it can backfire on the left as well. So if the right is in there and, hey, I don't know, somebody like Obama sends some drones over into Syria and wind up inadvertently, mistakenly killing a couple Americans, this happened, by the way, then I would think those families could sue former President Obama and he should go to the slammer, right? I mean, that's something that could happen if you don't have immunity, but it's been accepted and understood, frankly, that you have a certain kind of immunity. It's just this is the first time it's actually been put on display. And so I want to show you this one because Ketanji Brown Jackson, KBJ, she started to question the Trump lawyer who is giving RFK a run for his money in terms of his vocal prowess. So just manage through that if you would. You have to listen very, very carefully. Anyway, this is the Trump lawyer, and she's just trying to go back at him over and over and keeps interrupting him. And he kind of says the really obvious thing, which is that, you know what, like this is just kind of the way it works. I want you to hear this short clip. Let's play Ketanji Brown Jackson trying to grill the Trump lawyer, John Sauer.
Benjamin Franklin said we view the prosecution of a chief executive as something that everybody cried out against as unconstitutional. And what George Washington said is we're worried about factional strife, which will...
No, I'm also, let me put this worry on the table. If the potential for criminal liability is taken off the table, wouldn't there be a significant risk that future presidents would be emboldened to commit crimes with abandon while they're in office? It's right now the fact that we're having this debate because OLC has said that presidents might be prosecuted. Presidents from the beginning of time have understood that that's a possibility. That might be what has kept this office from turning into the kind of crime center that I'm envisioning. But once we say no criminal liability, Mr. President, you can do whatever you want, I'm worried that we would have a worse problem than the problem of the president feeling constrained to follow the law while he's in office.
I respectfully disagree with that because the regime you've described is the regime we've operated under for 234 years. There has not been an expectation based on 234 years of unbroken political.
All right, let me ask you another question.
Okay, she didn't like the answer to that. She had to go back again and interrupt him over and over and over again. Look, you know what? If you don't have immunity as the president of the United States, and we're not saying you can do really wacky, crazy things. I think over on MSNBC, they're like, oh, great, now he can just, murder his wife and get away with it. No, that's not what we're talking about here, okay? We're talking about having a certain kind of immunity for political reasons. Because the last thing that you want, ladies and gentlemen, is for the other side, for purely political motives to come in, as this one has done, and be able to attack you, as we see happen in other parts of the world. I mean, just go down to Argentina or Venezuela or Brazil. The current president of Brazil, Lula, he was in the slammer. He got out. His vice president was also in federal prison. I mean, this is their MO, right? That's how they operate. Because as soon as the other side comes in, they go, okay, we're going to take you to task. And so there should be some kind of protection, expectation that just because you have a shift in power doesn't mean that they're going to put you in jail. And Donald Trump is making the point that if you don't have this kind of immunity, then you're really, truly a sitting duck. You're at risk. Here he is outside his other trial going on today there in New York. Let's listen to him make the point.
I think that the Supreme Court has a very important argument before it today. I would have loved to have been there, but this judge would not allow that to happen. I should be there, but he wouldn't allow it to happen. I think he puts himself above the Supreme Court, which is unfortunate, isn't it? But the argument on immunity is very important. The president has to have immunity. This has nothing to do with me. This has to do with a president in the future, for 100 years from now. If you don't have immunity, you're not going to do anything. You're going to become a ceremonial president. You're just going to be doing nothing. You're not going to take any of the risks, both good and bad. I mean, you're going to make some great decisions and save the country. You're going to make some decisions which are unfortunate, but that's the way it is. But you're not going to do anything if you don't have immunity, because otherwise you're going to be prosecuted after you leave office for doing something like going into an area, going into a country, doing lots of things that you wouldn't be doing. And we don't want a ceremonial president. We have to have a real president. And assuming you have the right person, that can make a big difference. You saw that for 4 years when I was president. We were respected all over the world. We had...
You know, he's making some really important points there. I want to go to some comments from Mike Davis, who used to be a Supreme Court clerk. He's part of the Federalist Society, and he made these on Twitter, and they are pretty important to hear right now. He made the point that Biden is attempting to establish a dangerous precedent that presidents can face prosecution for their official acts. If presidential immunity doesn't exist, then a Trump 47 Justice Department could prosecute Barack Obama for capital murder for ordering a drone strike on 2 American citizens, one of whom was a minor. That was what I was just telling you about. Joe Biden, he writes, could also face prosecution for his illegal mass parole of millions of illegal immigrants and their resulting crimes. George Bush and Dick Cheney could face prosecution if they lied to drive us into the Iraq War. This is not a path that we want to go down as a country. This unfounded assault on Joe Biden's chief political opponent is a grave threat to our system of government. Well said, Mike Davis. In other words, what are you doing? Why are you opening a kind of Pandora's box like this for purely political purposes? I've told you guys this before, but I'll share this story of Donald Trump telling me, when I asked him, I'm like, hey, so why didn't you go after Hillary Clinton? You know, the whole bleach bit with the server, et cetera. Why didn't you pursue that? And he said to me, you know, Trish, like it's the United States of America. Like it really doesn't look good if we're like throwing everybody. I mean, he's actually a pretty magnanimous person. And I think when he gets pushed into the corner, he's like, okay, the gloves are off. And I have a feeling like if he's back there, the gloves might just be off. Everybody's going to want immunity. They're going to say, thank you, sir, for having put this thing in. I mean, because really and truly, you could go after a lot of politicians for all kinds of things, right? Because things happen. Things happen. Mistakes happen. In terms of J6, you want to go after him for that. I mean, wow. I mean, can we go after Nancy Pelosi, who failed to call in the appropriate reinforcements? Maybe we should. In terms of Fani Willis and trying to go after him down in Georgia. Because he dared to say, hey, you know, can I challenge this? Apparently you can't challenge anything. No, if you challenge something, then you're in violation of the law. If you come up with an alternate slate of people to verify the election because, you know, you want to have an alternate just in case. Oh, that's in violation of the law, even though they did that in Hawaii with Kennedy way back when. Listen, guys, I mean, this is just out of control. I think it's very obvious that it's out of control, but frightening that it's this out of control. I do think ultimately it comes down to a historic win for President Trump and a historic win for the country. And I don't think that you're going to have crazy people doing crazy things. I think it's merely going to serve as a means to help protect future presidents from this political vitriol, which is clearly really, really abundant. just so abundant. I mean, think about this one. I mean, FDR, this came up. And the counselor to Special Counsel Smith, Jack Smith's guy, was talking about how today FDR could have been charged with conspiracy against civil rights for his decision to intern Japanese Americans. Now, I'm not saying it was a good decision, right? Like, I mean, it was really, really kind of a horrible time, and we were at war, and it was a different time. And there were decisions made at that time that had to do with national security. So what, you prosecute him after the fact and you send him to jail when he's making a real-time decision? That doesn't seem like it would be fair, right? But let's listen to this exchange happening just moments ago there at the Supreme Court.
It is correct, Justice Alito, but I think that we should also consider the history of this country. As members of the court have observed, it's baked into the Constitution that any president knows that they are exposed to potential criminal prosecution. My friend says after impeachment and conviction, we don't read the impeachment judgment clause that way, but it's common ground that all former presidents have known that they could be indicted and convicted. And Watergate cemented that understanding. The Watergate smoking gun tape involved President Nixon and H.R. Haldeman talking about and then deciding to use the CIA to give a bogus story to the FBI to shut down a criminal investigation.
I mean, Mr. Sauer and others have identified events in the past where presidents have engaged in conduct that might have been charged as a federal crime, and you say, well, no, that's not really true. This is page 42 of your brief. So what about President Franklin D. Roosevelt's decision to intern Japanese Americans during World War II? Couldn't that have been charged under 18 U.S.C. 241, conspiracy against civil rights?
Today, yes, given this court's decision in Trump versus United States, in which Trump versus Hawaii, where the court said Korematsu is overruled. I mean, President Roosevelt made that decision with the advice of his Attorney General. That's a layer of safeguard.
Is that really true? I thought Attorney General Biddle thought that there was really no threat of sabotage, as did J. Edgar Hoover.
So I think that there is a lot of historical controversy, but it underscores that occurred during wartime. It implicates potential commander-in-chief concerns about the exigencies of national defense that might provide an as-applied Article II challenge at the time. I'm not suggesting today, but the idea that a decision that was made and ultimately endorsed by this court, perhaps wrongly, in the Korematsu case, would support criminal prosecution under 241, which requires under United States versus Lanier that the right have been made specific so that there is notice to the president. I don't think that would have been satisfied.
All right, well, we could go through other historical examples. I won't do that. Let me just touch briefly.
So, again, I think that the problem that we're having in this moment in time is that they want to have this sort of two-tiered system, right, where they get to use the law as a kind of lawfare. And so that is inherently just a major problem, right, for the country in the here and now, and of course, for the future. And so as I listen to these arguments, and there's been about 3 hours of them, I really think the upshot is that these justices are leaning towards actually acknowledging some of these immunity claims, because you can't have a situation where the next side comes in and says, okay, well, we don't want that person running again. We don't want that party existing again. Let's do everything we can legally to be able to go after them. I mean, this is exactly what we're witnessing, ladies and gentlemen, in real time. Sometimes I say to myself, but why? Like, why him? I think it has a lot to do with him being so different, so much not part of the system. He's not somebody who came up through the ranks. He doesn't play by their set of rules. He's very much sort of, let me look at this in a plain vanilla, obvious way. I don't need to have your buckets and buckets and buckets of intel. Let me just deal with this as a normal human being, because, this is what CEOs do. People in the business world, you know what? You got to make money. So you look at things simply and often very innovatively. But in Washington, you don't care about that. You don't care about results, right? You only care about getting elected. So they don't look at things, or if you're part of the operation, right, you think about just keeping your job. And how frightening is this? I mean, you think about the CIA really not having anything to do after the Cold War, right? Once that was over, like they're sitting around twiddling their thumbs. What are they going to do? They can't fight the Soviets anymore. And that was when you came up with NATO, and NATO started its expansion, and so on, to the point where we're now looking at, well, a full-blown war, obviously, over there, but a new kind of Cold War that's been bubbling up and, well, helping them stay in business. And so someone from the business world is going to say, wait a second, we need to cut that department. We don't need them, right? Like, they're dead weight. And government's like, no. We need more. We need more of them, because they don't care about dead weight. Money is irrelevant. It is something that you can just literally print in their estimation. So the Supreme Court is trying to be thoughtful about this. Look, if you look at any of the media today, I'm not on a limb here. The New York Times thinks the Supreme Court's actually going to go with Donald Trump. I'm reading the headline right now in the Wall Street Journal that I'm bringing to you. Supreme Court appears open to some of Trump's immunity claims. This is the New York Times. Supreme Court conservative majority seems ready to limit election case against Trump. For sure. I mean, I don't think we have the soundbite right now, but it's one of my favorites. Hillary Clinton in August of 2020, so just weeks before the November election, went on one of her friends' podcasts, somebody who used to be on her PR team, and she was offering advice for Joe Biden. Her advice was that you fight it no matter what. No matter what. If it looks like it's close at all, you fight, and you don't give up. And so that's what she was saying going into the election. But when Donald Trump dared to fight it because it was close in some places, then suddenly he's trying to take over the country and become a dictator and this, that, and the other. All right, you see the hypocrisy. You see where this is going. Anyway, the justices, I suspect, are going to rule in favor of having some immunity. And so this is going to put Fani Willis out of business. This is going to put a whole bunch of people, Jack Smith, out of business. Pretty much most of his case will be utterly destroyed as a result of this. And it leaves us with, Judge Merchan's case and Alvin Bragg and this whole quote unquote hush money because somebody signed an NDA for $130,000. I don't understand what's illegal about that, by the way. Your friend, David, runs a journalist organization. I say journalist in quotations because it's the National Enquirer. But hey, we should put the New York Times occasionally in quotations too, because the New York Times is the one that was perpetuating and promoting and dropping sort of hints and whatever about Tulsi Gabbard being a Russian spy, right? Like they do what they have to do to go after their opponent. Look what they're doing to Donald Trump. Look at the whole Russia tape thing, right? The dirty dossier thing. I mean, they were reporting on that as though it was fact, day in and day out. CNN was, MSNBC was, and yet it was all bogus. So, hey, those in glass houses really shouldn't be throwing stones, right? So David Becker over there, he is what he is over at the National Enquirer saying, well, I'm going to help my friend. I mean, is that any different than Rachel Maddow putting out a bunch of you-know-what to help her friends? I don't think so. Again, I don't see how any of that is actually illegal. I really don't. But who am I? I mean, I'm the one who said I don't really think it's illegal that he did a deal with Deutsche Bank and he valued his properties at a certain amount, which, yes, helped him get a lower rate on his loan. But Deutsche Bank did its due diligence and agreed with the valuations and agreed to do the loan. And by the way, got paid back in full. Therefore, you have no victims in that case. And yet, they slap him with $500 million in fines because they want to go after his stuff and take his property and try and ruin his life. And then when it gets knocked down to $175 million, Letitia James says, well, I don't trust the bond company. I want his stuff, right? Because she just wanted to go after his property. I mean, it's really kind of sickening. It's really sickening. And I suspect it will ultimately help him win this election, ladies and gentlemen, win indeed. And when he wins, and I have more on that because I've got a new poll on I want to share with you, but when he wins, he's going to need the wind at his back, which means he's going to need the Senate and he's going to need Congress. He needs as much support as he can get, which is one of the reasons why I've been proud to partner with Americans for Prosperity. AmericansForProsperity.org. You should go there and check them out. On Monday, one of their brilliant, brilliant policy leaders is going to be joining this show. So we'll talk with her a little bit more about the challenges here ahead should Donald Trump win, the importance of having everybody that you can to really get the kinds of policy through so that, well, we have a better economy, so that we have a stronger border, and so that we're not making reckless mistakes all around the world, engaging in military conflicts that really aren't going to be for the betterment of us and the American people. So AmericansForProsperity.org, I do encourage you to check them out. Just a wonderful group. Sign up. Oh, see how excited I am about them? I'm losing my pen. Anyway, AmericansForProsperity.org.